Okay. Look, the SEC had a phenomenal regular season in basketball. There's no denying that. The Big 12, for instance, went 2-14 against the SEC in non-conference play. And the SEC had a winning record against every other Power 5 conference, dominant record against everybody except the Big 10. They were 10-9 against the Big 10. You add that to, they've already got the best college football conference. In general, I know last year I would not agree with that statement, but in general, they've got that. So it's a tough pill to swallow for everybody in college hoops right now to see that the SEC reigns supreme. But do they actually reign supreme is the question that I will ask here, because one of, if not the smartest mind in college basketball has now raised that question. Should we be asking this more? And it seems to have gotten under the skin of one Greg Sankey, SEC commissioner, right? So when I say one of the smartest minds in college basketball, I am referring to Ken Pomeroy, KenPom, Mr. Pom, as I sometimes lovingly refer to him as. But look, go to KenPom.com, great site. Been a member there for years. And it's what the stat heads like, right? I know some of you out there will hate it, and some of you out there look at me like I am incredibly rudimentary because, like, I look at KenPom. I know enough to be dangerous, but I don't live, eat, breathe, and sleep it. I will go to Bart Torvik occasionally, but I'm not. I keep myself at a point where I know enough to be dangerous, but I'm not overly stat guy. So both sides of the aisle may be looking at me a little bit crosswise there, but I very much respect Ken Pomeroy and KenPom's opinion here. So he has weighed in on the SEC, which is about to get, by the way, 13 or 14 teams into the NCAA tournament. It depends on what happens with Oklahoma and Texas, who I believe are literally like the last team in and the first team out right now of the field. But the SEC is potentially going to get a record number of teams in here to the NCAA tournament. They've got 3 number 1 seeds. They've got 5 top 3 seeds projected by Lenardi right now. And as a conference, they have the best non-conference winning percentage ever. That's a hell of a resume for what the SEC has done so far this season. But KenPom raised the question, like, why aren't we talking about the SEC being a little bit overrated? KenPom dared to call the SEC a bit overrated. Now, here's his reasoning. KenPom says, if you remember last year, there was an unusually organized subculture of fans and analysts that criticized the Big 12 for being overrated and gaming the system in the weeks leading up to the tournament. It's kind of strange that no similar backlash has developed this season against the SEC, a league that seems to have unanimous support as not only the season's best conference, but the best ever. And indeed, based on non-conference play, the SEC has been one of the best leagues of the internet era, and therefore possibly ever. Conference produced the best non-conference winning percentage over that time and the best scoring margin since the 1997 ACC. I guess I should probably amend what I said earlier by that. Yeah, the era that KenPom has been tracking here, the SEC had the best non-conference winning percentage. Just above 97 ACC, and then the point differential was like 18.2 for the ACC in 97 and 18 for the SEC this year. So they were very, very close on that part too. But Mr. Pom points out the 97 ACC is worth remembering, though. Theoretically, it was the best conference of the modern era, and yet its tournament performance that season was sad trombone worthy. Sad trombone worthy. North Carolina made the Final Four, but everybody else lost in second round, lost in Sweet 16, lost in first round. Then he points out the 2024 Big 12, which, I've already talked about here, but it wasn't good. Houston and Iowa State made the Sweet 16. Nobody else got past the second round. So KenPom says, we'll get to the data, but I think there's a strong non-data argument here about why a conference with extremely strong non-conference numbers is set up for tournament disappointment. So he's making the case here that conferences that do produce like this in the regular season are almost naturally doomed or naturally inclined to have a poor performance in the NCAA tournament, at least relative to expectation. And that could be something we talk about as well. What is a legitimate and fair expectation for everybody to have for them. But this, I think, is a really good point. And this is where, like, I really respect what KenPom does. And it doesn't take like a super crazy stat nerd to understand this. any group of teams that collectively exceed expectation at anything in November and December are headed for some regression. Whether it's three-point shooting, offensive rebounding, or just general performance, this is always going to be true. If we had another 2 months of non-conference action, the SEC would still be really good, but not quite as good as they looked earlier this season. It's just regression to the mean, right? I mean, you can get really hot at the beginning of the year, and you're probably going to regress a little bit. Like throughout the year, we'll see teams go through spurts where they look great and amazing, but it's a long season, and it always comes back around, right? BYU was not always playing like the team that they are right now that has won 8 straight. There were long stretches of the season where they looked much more like a borderline tournament team. Now they're a 5 seed. That's just how it works. You know, I mean, K-State, as bad as K-State was earlier this year, at 1.7-10, 3 games under 500, they then picked it up, and according to Bart Torvik, for 3 weeks played like the number 1 team in the country. Won 6 straight games. Neither of those was who they actually are, and there was regression coming after each one of those. So it does stand to reason, yes, if you overperform in the non-con, you're due for a bit of regression. But then by the time you hit conference play, and I guess this is the point that Brad Brownell and company were trying to make last year, then you hit the point where you can't really tell anything in conference play because, as the running joke has gone this year, I mean, you got to fight. The SEC went 500 in conference play this year. Shocker. But that's the reality because, yes, obviously, you have to. You have to. And that's point number 2 that KenPom made. We really have no idea if conferences as a whole are improving or not after January 1st when non-conference play ends. So that's what he's saying. Like, hey, the SEC may have peaked too early. It's kind of, I feel like KenPom is saying the SEC might be the really popular jock in high school. Peaked a little bit too early. Maybe it's better to be nerdy in high school and then you come around in your 20s or 30s, making a bunch of money, doing great, lovely family. Maybe that's more BYU here, coming and turning it on late in the year, right? That's what KenPom's trying to say. Well, that didn't sit really well with Greg Sankey, at least not through the filtered messaging lens of one Danny Cannell, okay? So Danny Cannell post the screenshot of KenPom's article, Why Hasn't Anyone Said the SEC is Overrated? Says the smartest man in basketball is saying out loud what I've been thinking for the past 3 months. And Greg Sankey felt the need to get on Twitter and do a little dunking, and shows that the 30-4 record against the ACC, the 14-2 record against the Big 12, that does hurt. The 10-9 record against the Big 10 and 185-23 in non-con games. So Greg Sankey, hey, I can't hate too much on that. I mean, it's hard to argue with a lot of those numbers. Now, that doesn't discount KenPom's point at all, because KenPom would turn around and say, well, Greg Sankey is actually making my point, in fact, here, by showing how much they peaked early in the year and how much they would be due for some actual regression based on that. So I don't think it really threatens him at all. But clearly, seeing that somebody is respected as Ken Pomeroy, writing that and then having that filter out through different channels of messaging here is something he felt the need to respond to, got under his skin a little bit. I must say, pretty impressive, Mr. Pom. Pretty impressive to get under Greg Sankey's skin. I can appreciate that. I'm surprised that Greg Sankey felt the need to take to Twitter. I'm surprised it wasn't just, a Peter Burns tweet. Like, that seems to be the Baghdad Bob of the SEC. Like, why did they not just slip him a note? Like, hey, go take this up. Go do the dunking on this one. That is intriguing to me. Sankey clearly feels it's very important. Look at Greg Sankey becoming a basketball man, showing you the importance of basketball now. He's got to take to using the Twitter fingers himself when it's precious SEC basketball that's on the line. See what happens in the tournament, man. We'll see what happens in the tournament. The good news for them, I feel like more so than having like the really high seeds, they've just got sheer numbers to throw at the thing, man. They've got 13 or 14 teams that are going to be in this field. It will be hard to not get somebody in the Final Four when you've got 14 cracks at it, man. 14 lotto tickets. It's like the NFL draft, Everybody loves having more draft capital, more draft picks, as opposed to specifically just high picks. If you just have more picks, you can throw all those picks out there. They're lottery tickets, something's bound to hit. The SEC, something's bound to hit. But we'll see.